For centuries, Slavic people were among the most heavily trafficked populations in Europe. Most had been born free, but were enslaved through capture or occasionally through sale by relatives. During the 8th through 10th centuries, slaves were traded from Eastern Europe and the Baltic to elite households in Byzantium and the Islamic world via the Dnieper and Volga river systems, the Carolingian Empire, and Venice. In the 13th century, the structure of this slave trade changed as a result of the Mongol invasion of Eastern Europe, Italian colonization of the Black Sea, the success of the Mamluk state, and the crusading activities of the Teutonic Knights in the Baltic. People enslaved in the Baltic now tended to be traded westward rather than eastward. People enslaved in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus tended to pass through the Black Sea into Italian, Mamluk, or Ottoman hands. And people enslaved in the Balkans were trafficked primarily by Venetians or Ottomans. It was also common for European people to be enslaved and traded in the Muslim world. European women, in particular, were highly sought after to be concubines in the harems of many Muslim rulers. Examples of such slavery conducted in Islamic empires include the Arab slave trade, the Barbary slave trade, the Ottoman slave trade, and the Black Sea slave trade, among others. Millions of Europeans were therefore trafficked over different time periods of European slavery. The term Slav refers to a broad group of people living in Eastern Europe, encompassing nations such as Poland, Ukraine, Russia, and the Balkans. Their name is closely tied to the origin of the word slave itself, which comes from the Latin sclavus, directly linking the Slavs to the concept of enslavement. This association wasn't accidental. For centuries, Slavic populations were targeted by foreign empires, Viking raiders, and even their own neighboring tribes to be captured and sold into slavery. Demand from the Islamic world, which arose in the 7th century, dominated the slave trade in Europe during the medieval period, 500 to 1500 AD. The term sakaliba was often used in medieval Arabic sources to refer specifically to Slavs being traded by the Arabs, but it could also refer more broadly to Central, Southern, and Eastern Europeans who were also traded by the Arabs, as well as all European slaves in some Muslim-controlled regions like Spain, including those abducted from raids on Spanish Christian kingdoms. The Slavic slave trade was complex, involving various regions and actors. The earliest and perhaps most infamous traders were the Vikings, known in the East as the Varangians. As they expanded across the rivers of Eastern Europe, they captured Slavic men, women, and children, transporting them through trade routes to the Byzantine Empire and the Arab world. The Byzantine Empire was a key market for Slavic slaves. Emperors used them as domestic servants, soldiers, and laborers in large estates. Likewise, the Arab world, which was expanding through the Middle East and North Africa, had an insatiable demand for labor. The Slavs, regarded as sturdy and resilient, were prized within Arab markets for their ability to endure harsh working conditions. In later centuries, the Crimean Khanate, a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire, became a central hub for the Slavic slave trade. Positioned on the Black Sea, the Crimean Tatars would raid Slavic lands in Eastern Europe, including present-day Ukraine, Poland, and Russia, to capture slaves. These raids were called harvests of the steppe, as they were carried out annually, with thousands of men, women, and children taken from their homes. Captured Slavs were then transported to slave markets in the Ottoman Empire, where they were sold into servitude. They ended up in Turkish households, where many toiled in fields and homes, or soldiers in the Ottoman military, often as janissaries, elite soldiers who had been conscripted and trained since childhood, eunuchs, the act carried out by Jewish merchants, and bodyguards to some caliphs. Women were frequently sold into harems, where they lived under the control of their masters. The Ottoman Empire's vast wealth and growing territories created an enormous demand for labor, fueling this brutal trade for centuries. One of the more interesting dynamics of the Arab slave trade was the upward mobility some Sakaliba experienced. Although enslaved, A number of Slavic men became military leaders, politicians, and officials, notably in the courts of the Abbasid Caliphate. While this wasn't the norm, it shows that the fate of Slavic slaves was varied, and some found a way to improve their status despite their servitude. The toll of the Slavic slave trade was enormous. Raids devastated communities, villages were depopulated, and the constant threat of capture made life perilous for those living in targeted regions. The psychological scars ran deep, and the legacy of fear and loss has been passed down through generations. The massive trade in Slavic slaves also underpinned the economic growth of Europe in the 9th and 10th centuries. By the 15th century, the Slavic slave trade began to wane. This was due to a combination of factors, including the rise of more centralized states in Eastern Europe, like Muscovy and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which could better defend their territories. The Ottoman Empire also shifted its focus toward expansion into other parts of Europe and North Africa, reducing its dependence on Slavic slaves. Moreover, European powers began to turn their attention toward Africa for slaves, initiating the infamous transatlantic slave trade, which overshadowed the once dominant Slavic trade. However, the Slavic slave trade didn't just have negative impacts. In some ways, it shaped the cultural and economic identity of the Slavic people. Slavic slaves who were sent to distant lands brought back knowledge, cultural influences, and even military techniques when they returned to their homelands. They helped to create stronger political entities, including the rise of Kievan Rus and Poland-Lithuania, which eventually resisted further slave raids. In conclusion, it's important to recognize that slavery has affected diverse groups across the globe, including the Slavs. The Slavic slave trade was one of the largest and longest-running in history, deeply influencing the political, economic, and social fabric of Eastern Europe. Its legacy can still be felt today, as the centuries of raids, displacement, and servitude left an indelible mark on Slavic societies. Although often overlooked, the Slavic experience with slavery is a crucial part of the broader history of human bondage. By examining it, we gain a fuller understanding of the global reach and devastating impact of slavery throughout history. What part of this epic topic fascinates you the most? Drop your thoughts below, and let's dive deeper into the currents of history together. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more on A Cuppa History.